little, I frequently traveled with them by myself. And when I would get on a plane with like a baby strapped to my front and a toddler trailing behind me, it was like no one would make eye contact with me, right? Like they'd be sitting there thinking, please don't sit by me. Please don't sit by me, which is completely understandable. Like no judgment, really. But here's the deal. When my very capable husband travels with kids by himself and walks on an airplane with a kid strapped to his chest and a toddler trailing behind him, everybody on the airplane is like, "Aw." And then during the flight, people will walk up to him from like 20 rows back and they're like, "I just wanted to make sure you're doing okay. Do you need any snacks? Like I brought an extra game. I just need you to know, like, you are really impressive." And my husband and I laugh about this all the time. And here's the deal. I appreciate and so respect the differences between moms and dads because both are so important. But today, as we think about Mother's Day coming up, I want to look at the untapped potential that is likely sitting in your church. So I regularly get asked to speak at corporate conferences with marketing execs from Fortune 500 companies. And you might be thinking, why would a Christian leader of a nonprofit that works with moms be invited to share? The reason is because over the past 5 years, these major corporations have become convinced that moms are some of the most influential people on the planet. In fact, I was at an event about a year ago, and I was listening to the speaker who was going on before me, and this is verbatim what he told the audience. He said, "We have made a strategic shift to focus all of our marketing dollars on reaching moms." And he said the reason is because it's effective. He said moms influence everything from what brands of detergent gets purchased to what religion families practice. He said moms are evangelists. And if you want the fastest, smartest, and most efficient method for spreading a message, start with the moms. And that was a marketing exec at Unilever Corporation. I just love that, how he said that moms are evangelists. And if you want the fastest, smartest, and most efficient method for spreading a message, you start with the moms. And so I want to show you a couple of sets of data that marketers are looking at to inform their opinion. So first, what marketers know is that moms influence economies. So here are a couple of stats. U.S. moms control 85% of household purchases, and their spending power is $2.4 trillion. And just to give you a kind of a framework for what that means, that's more than France or Italy or Canada's GDP. Second, according to a recent study done by the UN, one of the most effective ways to raise a community out of poverty is to resource the moms. And in addition to that, Barna did this really brilliant study. It was called The Influence of Moms in Christian Households. And what they found was that teens consistently identify their mom as their primary partner for almost all activities. So that means eating meals together, watching TV or movies, talking about God. And the only time that mothers are not primarily their key partner is when it comes to activities like interacting on social media or playing sports, which completely makes sense. But the other thing that we see at MOPS is that 88% of moms say that the first place they look for recommendations on purchases or advice on life is from other moms. And finally, in relation to faith, 77% of adults say that their mom is one of the most important and influential people in their faith life. And this stat gets me every time. 82% of families say they started going to church because mom decided it was important. And so, if you want kids to show up at church, you start with the mom. If you want to alleviate poverty or reach teens or influence how dollars get spent, or most importantly, if you want to create an exponential movement of people who are recommending Jesus, you start with the moms. See, if brands like Google and Amazon and Unilever and Dove and Chick-fil-A and Dole have all made utilizing moms' innate influence a major focus of their outreach efforts, what would it look like for the church to as well? Because when we reach moms, it is exponential evangelism. See, when a mom meets Jesus, her kids do as well. And I am convinced, and what we're seeing at MOPS is that a movement is being sparked around the globe. And we're convinced that this next Jesus movement is starting with the moms. It reminds me of that verse in 2 Timothy 1:5. And we read where Paul, who's sitting in a jail cell, writes a letter to his friend Timothy, and it's passed through the bars of the cell. And Paul's sensing that this may be one of his final messages to Timothy. And what does Paul remind Timothy of? The faith of his mom and his grandma. Paul says, I remember your genuine faith, for you share that faith that was first filled by your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. And he's saying your faith is a reflection of their faith. And now I don't know anything about Lois or Eunice, but I do know something about mothers and grandmothers. They are the ones who hold on to faith when we are too weary to hold on for ourselves. They're the ones who mend our wounds and remind us that we're going to be okay, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. And when we need a reminder of the generational potential of faith, we can look to the moms. So to close, it's the summer of 1920, in what has been arguably the hottest month in decades in Nashville. And the famous Hermitage Hotel is just packed to the brim with legislators and lawyers and journalists and women who have traveled from across the U.S. And everyone in the hotel is wearing either a yellow or red rose on their lapel. Here's why. See, 40 years earlier, before everyone descended on the Hermitage Hotel, Congress voted on a 14th Amendment that would give slaves the right to vote. And as the amendment was drafted, women across the U.S. were convinced that this was the moment in history where they too would get the privilege of voting. But at the very last minute, right before the official decision, the word male was added to the amendment, and women were denied the right to vote. And it stayed that way for another 40 years. That is, until June 4th, 1919, when Congress voted to add 39 words to the Constitution. Those 39 simple words were also known as the 19th Amendment, which would give women the right to vote. Which brings us to the Hermitage Hotel and the lawyers and legislators and women who had descended on Nashville, where the final vote was going to take place to pass the 19th Amendment. And everybody was wearing a rose on their lapel. And the people with the yellow rose supported women's right to vote. And those wearing a red rose were voting against it. And so, on the morning of August 18th, 1920, the hotel that was currently packed begins to thin out as legislators begin to make their way to Union Station, where the final vote was going to be held. And having counted roses that morning, the suffragists, the women fighting for the amendment to pass, knew that they were in trouble. Like, it was not looking good. And Carrie Chapman Clark, the leader of the movement, decided to actually stay behind at the hotel because, as she told her friends, the only thing that we can do now is pray. So, a few blocks away at Union Station, 96 legislators take their seats, and one by one, each man stands up when they're called on, and they cast their vote. Those with the yellow rose would say yay in support of women's right to vote, and those wearing the red would say nay. So the vote starts and proceeds until it was Henry Burns' turn. So everybody called him Harry T. Burns. He was from Nyota, Tennessee, and he was the youngest legislator in the House. And newspaper stories about him, which are fascinating to read, say that he was small in stature and serious in disposition, and he tended to be the kind of person who blended into the background. He wasn't really one to make a scene or stand out in a crowd. Well, Harry stands to cast his vote wearing a red rose in his lapel. But in his pocket, no one knows, he has a telegram from his mom in Nyota. And his mom, her name was Feb Byrne, has written her son this ordinary letter that any other mom might have written her son. But it's filled with details about the family farm and updates on the neighbors. But tucked in to all of those mundane details about life in Nyota, there's one sentence, and it says, "Son, been reading about this suffrage fight in the papers and haven't seen your name anywhere, don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat out. Vote for suffrage and don't keep them in doubt. Love, Mama. So Harry stands up and votes yay. And everyone is shocked. They are silent. They can't believe what just happened because Harry changed his vote. And women have just been given the right to vote. And chaos erupts. There's actually a legend, you can read about this, that says that everybody's so livid, the anti-suffragists are so livid that they chase him out of the building and he has to jump out of a window and hide in the Capitol Library. But 6 days later, the 19th Amendment becomes a national law. And so men, your wives and daughters, and ladies, you and I, have the right to vote because Feb Byrne sent her son a note. And the remarkable thing about all of this to me has nothing to do with politics. It's the fact that moms can influence the world simply by living their everyday lives. And so, may this be a season where you intentionally mobilize the moms in your community. May you see women who are searching flock to your church in droves. May you find refreshment and joy as new creative and fun methods of outreach take shape. And may this Mother's Day spark a movement of revival in your church and in your city. Amen, and let it be so.